أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين. وإذا تتلى عليه آياتنا ولى مستكبرا كأن لم يسمعها كأن في أذنيه وقرا فبشره بعذاب أليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic that we will begin discussing tonight and continue with over the next 3 nights is the topic of Islam's take on the issue of music. And there's 2 disclaimers I want to mention before we get into our discussion on this topic. Number 1 is that obviously the topic is a complex and nuanced topic, and therefore my ask and request is that we don't form any opinions about the Islamic take on this issue until and only if we listen to the content of all 3 of these nights. That is number 1. And number 2, the second point I want to make is that the reason why we are delving into this topic is not just to understand Islam's opinion with regards to the topic of music, but rather because in this endeavor we will come across certain principles and certain teachings of Islam that will help us understand other areas of Islamic law as well. There are certain keys to our discussion that can solve a lot of other questions that we have that have nothing to do with the topic of music, but have to do with other areas of Islamic rulings and Islamic laws. Hence the reason to get into this topic. The reality is today, wherever you go, you will find music is present with you. If you decide to go out with your friends to play some pickup basketball, to play a game of sports, you will find that the arena or the facility that you are going to is playing some form of music. If you were to go, for example, with your friends to the shopping mall and to spend some time shopping, you will find that music is present there as well. You will find, for example, that if you watched a video online or even if you came across just a random commercial, usually there is some form of music that is accompanied along with the video that you are watching. You might go to your local grocery store just to pick up some basic necessities and some basic groceries. And again, you will find that music might be present in that area and in that atmosphere as well. Wherever you turn today, music is a reality that we deal with 24/7. If you look on your phone nowadays and the phone of the average person living within this society, you will find an app that is probably the most used app amongst all of the applications that they have on their phone. And for some, that might happen to be an application by the name of TikTok. And when you look at the success that an application of that sort has had, and you look at the roots of it and the reasons of it, you will find that one of the factors that played a role in this level of success that this application has had, and the way it has dominated the social media space, is because of how every video is always tied to some form of music. Actually, if you look at the logo, if you look at the icon of the application, you will find that the application, the icon, and the logo is actually something that represents a musical note. Hence the tie between any content that you produce and music being played alongside it. Hence, the topic of music is one that we deal with 24/7. This is from one angle. From the other angle, the second reason why we want to delve into this topic is that music is a very nuanced topic. It's not of one sort or two sorts. It's not one or two genres. There is music that can make you sad. There is music that can hype you up. There is music that can make you feel like you're healing. There is music that can scar your soul. There is music that can produce essentially every single emotion that lies within the human being. You will find some sort of music that will invoke that type of emotion within the human being. There is music that you can use for educational purposes. There is classical music, there's contemporary music, there is firm music, there is soft music. Every single emotion that the human being experiences, you will find some sort of music that is designed to invoke that emotion within the human being. So we deal with it very often. It is very nuanced. The third level of complexity of this topic is that never really do you come across a clear understanding of what Islam has to say about this issue. There's probably very little Q&As that I've ever done where the question about music does not come up. And what is Islam's opinion about this? And of course, this is something that I experienced growing up as well. Every day you would hear a new ruling about music. One day you would wake up, they would say, yes, the type of music that has terrible lyrics with, forgive me, sexual references or references to drug and alcohol use and so on and so forth, this type of music is haram, everything else is allowed. The next day you wake up, they say, no, the ruling changed last night. The ruling is something else. The type of music that makes you think about Allah, this is fine. The type of music that takes you away from Allah, this is a problem. The next day you wake up, they'll tell you the type of music that makes you want to dance, this one is a problem. The music that doesn't want to make you feel like you want to dance, this is not a problem. And believe it or not, once I heard this opinion growing up, that the type of music that is a problem is that type that has a very fast beat. And when I asked what is the definition of a fast beat, this young man, innocent young man said, well, if it goes faster than the beat of your heart, then this is a problem. If it goes slower than the beat of your heart, then it is allowed. And this is the third level of the complexity of this topic and the reason why we want to delve into it. Because very seldom do we have an opportunity to get into the topic and then walk away with clarity and walk away with me knowing on a practical level what I need to do about this issue. The fourth reason why this topic is so crucial, and we want to spend 3 nights on it, is because it's actually very much related to the incident of Karbala and the 2 camps that you had taking part in the plains of Karbala. When you look at the plains of Karbala, you have 2 camps there. You have the camp of Imam al-Hussein, and of course you have the camp of Ubaidullah or Hur, or the Yazidis we will call them. And one of those things that defines for us the lifestyle of people like Yazid was their involvement in listening to and producing haram music. This was part of their lifestyle. Yazid was well known for a number of different things during his time as the Khalifa. One of them, in fact, was that he was very much acquainted with haram music. And of course, the music that was played at that time for him was done through purchasing young females who would come and sing as a live concert, essentially, the music that was being played. He was so involved in this, in fact, that some of the companions of the Prophet, like Ibn Abbas, the famous companion of the Prophet, raised objection to him that you call yourself the Khalifa, but when we look into your life, gambling is a part of your life, alcohol is a part of your life, other things are a part of your life, and also the mughanniyats are also part of your life. Therefore, from all of these four angles, the fact that music is always around us, the fact that it is a very nuanced and complex topic, the fact that we never usually have clarity on the topic from the Islamic perspective, and because it is part of what makes someone similar to those who are in the camp of Yazid, tonight and the following 3 nights we will take time to delve into this topic. And in order to do so, we'll pose the following questions. Number 1, and the first question that we need to delve into: what are the 4 types of music or singing that used to take place during the time of the Prophet himself, that the Prophet raised objection to and told the Muslims not to engage in? Number 2, when we want to understand what is Islam's issue with a particular topic, can we assume what Islam has to say about that issue and tell whether Islam allows it or not based on how it affects our lives? Or do we have to go to Quran and Hadith to understand what Islam's take is on this particular issue? Number 3, what fundamental problem does Islam have anyways with the issue of music? Is it the issue of the lyrics that are in the song? Or does Islam have a more foundational issue with some types of music? Number 4, what is the concept of lahwa? And how does it relate to the topic of music? Number 5, if Islam has declared some forms of music to be forbidden and haram, does that mean Islam fundamentally is dismissing the beauty and the power of music? Or does that mean that Islam is acknowledging the power and the beauty of music? And number 6, and finally, what did our beloved 9th Imam, Imam al-Jawad, do when in his 4th wedding to the daughter of Ma'mun al-Abbasi, they brought someone to play haram music? How did he react in that situation? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 6 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Let us begin from here. Music has always accompanied the human being. At the end of the day, in its most basic form, it doesn't take too much to produce music. Sometimes all you need is a couple pots and a couple pans, and you can have yourself your own song, yes? Therefore, music has always been there with the human being. It might be difficult to come across a time where music wasn't a thing for the human being. And similarly, during the time of the Prophet, basic forms of music and singing was already present. But the presence of music in dancing was very limited. There were very limited instances where you would go after such a thing. And most of those instances, in fact, were haram instances, meaning there were situations that the Prophet, with the spread of Islam, eventually came to raise objection to. So as when you look at music today, there are types of music that some scholars allow, there are types of music that some scholars forbidden. Back in the day, during the time of the Prophet, most of the usages of music and singing were used mainly for haram purposes. There were also some basic halal usages as well. It was a common thing that if you were a Bedouin and you had camels moving from one point to another, you would, believe it or not, sing for the camels. And the idea was that these camels would move faster. And this might be something not too far from reality today as well. Yes, when there were occasions like weddings, there were some basic forms of singing, basic forms of music that were played. However, there were 4 types of music and singing that was done that the Prophet immediately raised objection to. And he had issues with these from the very beginning. The first of these, of course, was the type of music and dancing that was done that was part of religious practices and religious rituals. Believe it or not, at one point the mushrikeen, part of their tawaf around the house of Allah was singing and dancing. And the Quran references this, muka'an wa tasdiya. They used to sing and they used to dance. The Quran immediately raised objection to this. And this is a point we're going to come back to later on, brothers and sisters. How much has Islam involved tunes and rhythms in its rituals? Hold on to this, we're going to come back to this. This is an extremely important point. When Islam saw this singing and dancing happening as part of a religious ritual, immediately the Prophet raised objection to this. This was number one. Number two, there were recitation of poetry done with a particular rhythm to undermine the message of the Prophet. There were people, believe it or not, poets, who sometimes were paid and sometimes would do this on their own. They would do hajwa of the Prophet. They would recite poetry that would essentially discredit the message of the Prophet. And to you and I, poetry that's going to speak against someone may not seem so much of a big deal, but at that time, media was all about poetry. And if you had a strong poet and you had this person speaking against you, it would create confusion in the minds of your audience. So the Prophet is here preaching his message. All of a sudden, this poet comes out with this poetry that yes, this Muhammad is actually lost and he's crazy and he's lost it. This undermined the message of the Prophet. And this was the second form of singing that the Prophet raised objection to. The third of these forms was also what you found when women used to come to war. Usually you would assume it is a man that's coming to war, at least in the front lines. But as part of using and utilizing music and singing and dancing for the wrong reasons, the mushrikeen, when they used to come to war, they used to bring with them a group of their women as well. And the role of these women was to stand, of course, in the lines behind the initial lines, in the front lines, to encourage the men, to push them towards battle, to cheer them on. The femininity of these women was utilized to push the masculinity of the men who were in the battlefields. You see this very clearly in the Battle of Uhud. In the Battle of Uhud, there were women who came along with the army of the mushrikeen. And every time these men would start to get weak, these men would start to, lose a little bit of their energy, the women would start reciting poetry, singing, some of them with musical instruments as well. This is historical narrations, of course, to encourage them to go back to the battlefield, to encourage them to attack back against the Muslims. This was the third form that Islam raised objection to. And the fourth that Islam also raised objection to was the type of singing and music that was played in places of corruption and debauchery. This was a place where you would go if you had the wrong intentions and you wanted to be part of the wrong relationships. These were houses that were dedicated for this kind of stuff at that time, during the time of the Prophet. The Prophet immediately raised objection to these forms of music. This was during the time of the Prophet. As the Prophet passed away, the usage of music started to become far more prevalent in the Muslim society. Why? Because while the Prophet was alive, leadership was against this music. When the Prophet passed away, and now Bani Umayyah came into the picture, the leadership was first of all engaged in listening to this music and this singing, and secondly used to fund the singing and the music. So now, if this person was a mughanniya, if this young female was coming and singing, instead of being told that this is forbidden, you can't do this, instead of shutting down her shop, she was told that you get prizes from the Khalifa, you would get rewards from the people who are in charge. And one person who played a role in all of this was Muawiyah, because as part of his scheme, he didn't want uprisings happening every day and people having social awareness and knowing what's happening in society. So what did he use to keep people quiet while he can do his own business on the side? Of course, music was a big part of that. Parties and gatherings where this person forgets about what the reality of society is. He's only thinking about what's happening in front of him right now was part of this. This continued with Muawiyah. With Yazid, of course, it reached a new level, because at least with Muawiyah, he was a little discreet about it. He wasn't so open about it. With Yazid, all of a sudden, it's so clear, like we mentioned, Ibn Abbas raised objection to him. He said, you're saying you're Khalifa, but your life doesn't look like a Khalifa. How many years have passed? Maybe 50 years have passed from the passing of the Prophet. But The way you're living life, the way the Prophet used to live his life, these are so different from one another. Because music was a thing. Continue down this time, during the time of Bani al-Abbas, then music was fully celebrated. Mecca and Medina, which are Haramain Sharifain, both based off of both schools of thought in Islam. They became places where a mughanniya would come. This was what the city was known for now. And some historical narrations say when they used to come, people would come, stand in lines, waiting for hours to get into her quote-unquote concert. I don't know if this rings a bell, by the way, yes? People would come and wait in lines for hours. If we can see this mughanniya who's come to town now, because we want to be part of this concert that's happening, this gathering that is happening. During the time of Bani al-Abbas, the Khalifa would sit there, people would come and they would gift their songs to him. So from the songs that this person had, the Khalifa would sit there and say, let me make my own playlist out of this, yes? This one I like, this one I like, this one. This one is a masterpiece you've done. Come and take this many dinars from Baytul Mal for this beautiful singing and music you've produced. This continued. Bani al-Abbas was in charge. And from that time up to today, of course, music has evolved very heavily. If you move closer and closer and closer, then you have Mozart, and then you have Beethoven, and then you come closer to contemporary music. Of course, in the 20th century, everything changed because with technology, music, of course, evolved very heavily. If you look at music throughout this whole period, there is one common thread that scholars will point to, and based off of that, define this concept of music. And they'll tell you, music is the science and the skill of being able to put together different types of sounds, different forms of sounds, to produce particular emotions in the human being. Hold on to this definition. Music is always tied to what? Music is always tied to some form of emotion. We're going to have to discuss this quite a bit. So you find back in the day, philosophers would also study the science of music. It was actually a science. There's scholars, they have books about it, they have treatises about it, so on and so forth. Okay, wonderful. If it's that nuanced, then I want to understand what does Islam have in terms of a problem with this type of music. Usually when we come to this issue, when people want to figure out if Islam has a problem with something or Islam is okay with it, you know how they figure this out usually? They'll look into their own lives. They'll see, when I engage in this practice, in this behavior, does anything really go wrong in my life? Are there any problems that take place? Does it ruin my life? If they see negative effects to it, they say, yeah, it's a problem. If they don't see negative effects for it, they say, no problem, it's not a big deal. Move on. A very simplistic approach. But we're taught in Islam, this is very wrong approach to figuring out what Islam allows and what Islam doesn't allow. You can't sit there and say, well, I've listened to it before. It wasn't the end of the world, so I don't think Islam has a problem with this. That's not the way Islam works. The Imam says, Deen Allahi la yusabu bil uqul. The religion of God, you can't figure it out based on your own thoughts. You can't sit there and say, well, I don't think this is a problem. I don't think this is a major issue. Look at our religion, apply that logic to other aspects of our religion. Your whole religion will fall apart. So imagine, Islam says sometimes things that seem very insignificant to you are extremely important. Imagine if two people wanted to get married and they came to the sheikh. They said, Sheikh, we want to get married, we want to have our nikah. Imagine if Sheikh Mahdi sat there and he said, oh, you guys want to have your nikah? Okay. He snapped his fingers and said, you guys are married, go. They said, no. Don't you have to do something? Don't you have to recite some lines or something? Imagine if I sat there and said, don't worry about it, it's just a couple lines. What, so if I don't recite those, all of a sudden you guys are terrible people and all that kind of stuff? But if we recite those, everything is fine all of a sudden? That's what Islam says. But to you and I, does it seem that way? It doesn't seem that way. That's why the society we live in, that basically goes based off of, I'll do something. If it ruins my life, it's bad. Otherwise, I'll just move on with it. Today, polls show 40% of people, they don't even believe in marriage. What's marriage? We'll just live together. And guess what? In their own world, they're right. Because unless you're looking at it from a religious perspective, what meaning does it have? Say a couple words. Ankahtu this, mata'tu this. What benefit does it have? They're right in their appreciation of the issue. They're right in their understanding. But Islam says no, those couple of lines that we recite is the difference between this relationship being halal, wonderful, rewarded, this and that, and being haram, terrible, adultery, so on and so forth. Just these couple lines. Yes, this is how the religion of God works. You may not understand the reason behind everything, but Islam has significance behind these details. Islam says if someone comes to you and says salam to you, salam, and you don't respond to him, this is a major sin, it's a problem, how dare you, all of this. Baba, it's just one word. Islam says, yes, that one word is very important for me. You have to say that one word. He said salam to you, you have to respond to him. So when I come across the topic of music, I can't sit here, think I know everything about life, and act like, I don't think it's an issue from my perspective. Who are you? Who am I? We're human beings. You know what it means to be a human being? When you're a human being, that means half of your life you're asleep. Is that a fair assessment? A third, half of your life is asleep. Some of you guys are a third, some of you guys are half. We'll leave that for another time, yes? Half of our lives we're asleep. The other half, you're running after this issue, that issue, I don't know, go to school, come back, go to sleep, eat food, all this kind of stuff, go to the grocery store, so on. But somehow, when God comes to us and says, this is important, you and I act like we know everything in the world. Like we're some wise saints. God says, I have a problem with it. You say, I don't know, let me look into it, let me see if I see a problem with it. Who are you? We can't sit there in a position of acting like we know what life is. We know nothing about life. Let me tell you something. I'm saying this for the younger guys, yes? When you're 10, you're just figuring out stuff in life, yeah? You're just figuring out, this is that, yes? By the time you turn 20, you will look back on the last 10 years of your life, you'll be like, man, I knew nothing. But here's the painful part. From 20 to 30, the same exact thing happens again. When you turn 30, you look back on your 20s, like, oh man, I knew nothing. Here's the painful part. When you turn 40, you look back again and say, oh man, I knew nothing. This is who we are as human beings. We know nothing about life. The sooner you realize this, the more open you are to the one who created you to tell you how to run your life. Society has no idea where it's headed. Society just goes based off of whim. They don't know. And neither do you, and neither do I. It's just that you're blessed with Islam. You have something to fall back on. Otherwise, nobody knows how you're supposed to live life. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, yes, this is very important for me. And you and I sit there and say, I don't know. Well, let me look into it. You know what the Quran says about this? There's a beautiful verse in the Quran. Anytime you hear a ruling of Islam, and it's established for you, this is actually the ruling, yes? You've done your research, you're sure this is the ruling, but it doesn't make sense to you, or you don't feel like, I want to accept it. Always remember this verse of the Quran. The Quran says what? The Quran says, قُلْ Ya Rasulullah, go and tell them, أَتُنَبِّئُونَ اللَّهَ بِمَا لَا يَعْلَمُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَلَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Are you trying to teach God now? Are you trying to switch the spot of the teacher and the student now? Oh, I don't think so. Baba, who are you? You don't know anything about life. I don't know anything about life. None of us do. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His ultimate wisdom is going to tell you something is allowed or not allowed, and we act like we're a big deal. No, you're that drop of fluid that barely made it here. That's who you and I are. The Quran has a beautiful verse. This is in Surah Yasin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الْإِنسَانِ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِن نُطْفَةٍ. Does the human being not remember that we created him from a drop of fluid? فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. All of a sudden, he's arguing against us. You were the one who couldn't breathe on your own. Now all of a sudden you think you know everything about life. This man came to the Prophet, he said, Muhammad, you tell us that we're going to be resurrected again and all of this kind of, you tell us to follow you and listen to your religion and your faith and all this. What is all of this? The narration says, the Prophet took his hand, took a little bit of saliva from his mouth, put it on his hand. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses you. He says, Yabna Adam, why do you try to stand in my way and object to me when I created you from this? You were that drop of fluid. Now that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought you into this world, you're still learning every day about this life. But yet when He shares His wisdom, you have your own opinions and you want to figure out how to live life on your own. No, you and I, brothers and sisters, are lost in life. So when we come to this issue, well, I think this is this, breaking news. God doesn't really care what you think. I know it's painful to listen, yes? Maybe the brothers can run this at the bottom of the breaking news. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't care. Because you're not in a position of knowledge. You're barely figuring out how to live your own life. So now we have to go to Quran and Hadith. We have to kneel in front of Quran and Hadith and have them tell us what is a big deal and what isn't a big deal. How often do you hear people sitting there and saying, oh, so you're telling me out of everything else, God cares if I'm in my car and I listen to this music. Is that what you're telling me? I don't know. Don't ask me. Let's go ask Him. If He says it's a big deal, it's a big deal. If He says it's not a big deal, we'll say it's not a big deal. Let's see what He has to say about it. Don't just assume things. Let us go to Quran and Hadith and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is this a problem that you have with music? Or no, it's not a big deal. Recite a salawat, please. We pose this question to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. Ya Allah, do you have a problem with music? Normally, the average Muslim would assume that the problem Islam has with music or some forms and sorts of music is the type of lyrics that accompany that music. Of course, if there are lyrics that have sexual references, this person will say this music is a problem. If it's a music that has drug and alcohol references, substance abuse, he'll say this is a problem. Violence, he will say this is a problem. But actually, if you go to Quran and Hadith, you will find that Quran and Ahl Bayt have a deeper issue with music beyond these things. In other words, if you come across the type of music that doesn't necessarily include these things, still Islam has a problem with it sometimes. So, Ya Allah, what is your problem? I thought that was a problem. No, there's something deeper. What is that deeper concept that Islam has a problem? That is the problem and the concept of lahw. L-A-H-W, lahw. What is the concept of lahwa? The Quran says, listen, sometimes there is certain types of speech. When you listen to those types of speech, they are lahwi. What does lahwi mean? It means the type of entertainment that is distracting. It is the type of speech that I listen to. Now, instead of speech, put lecture, put music, put whatever you want to put, yes? That type of content that I listen to, that makes me less likely of looking towards the akhirah. It doesn't mean I'm going to immediately get up and not pray or, break my fast. No, it doesn't mean any of that. It means it pushes you in that direction. When I'm listening to this type of music, I'm less likely to worry about my akhirah. I'm less likely to worry about my duties as a Muslim. I move on with life. Things sound wonderful. Islam has a problem with this type of music, the lahwi type of music, the type of music that makes you sit back and forget about the concerns and the responsibilities that you have and the akhirah and the day of judgment. It's good, it's fine, everything is cool. Islam has a problem with this type of music. Now, you might ask, well, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have a problem with me listening to something that might make me forget about the akhirah? I'm not killing anyone. I'm not stealing from anyone. Yes, Here's the thing. There are certain types of evil in this world. They are evil in and of themselves. No one comes up to you, and no one has ever come up to me and say, Sheikh, I have a question. Why is it bad to lie? No one asked me that question. No one comes up to you, Sheikh, I have a question real quick. Why is it bad to kill? Ya Allah. This is a scary guy. Ya Allah, Sheikh, I have a question. Why is it bad to steal from other people? No, you don't ask that question, inshallah. Some things, their evil is because of what they lead to. They're not evil in and of themselves. Lahwa in Quran and Hadith is one of these concepts. Why? Because the moment you start to forget about the akhirah, all sorts of sins open up their doors to you. Forget about one or two sins. What does the Quran say about the people who end up in the hellfire? One of their main characteristics is what? Nasu yawm al-hisab. They forgot about the day of judgment. If shaitan can give you something with all of your belief and all of your iman and everything, yes? But he can just make you forget about akhirah. Guess what? He won. Because the moment you forget about akhirah, you're done. The thing that's holding you back is your akhirah. Half the stuff we do in Islam doesn't necessarily show its full impact while we're alive. A lot of it shows itself on the day of judgment. The moment I forget about my akhirah, then that becomes a problem. This is the beauty of Islam that's telling you and I, stealing, cheating, killing other people, these are all big sins and these are all evil. The beauty of Islam will tell you that there are other things that are evil that you can't figure out on your own mind. I will tell you they are evil. One of those evils is something that makes you forget about your akhirah. Because you just open the floodgates to all sorts of terrible things. Now, someone might say, well, Sheikh, I do other things other times that eases my mind, that soothes my mind. So maybe I'm having a stressful day. I go around, for example, I might want to watch a football game, a basketball game. When I'm watching the basketball game, I'm not thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I am also doing what? Forgetting about my worries and my concerns and my student debt and all of this kind of stuff, yeah? Sheikh, sometimes I engage in hobbies. Sometimes I might play a game. Sometimes I might do this, I might do that. Pay attention, this is a very important point. Key point. So Islam has a problem with all of these? No, Islam doesn't have a problem with all of those because the power of numbing that those activities have is nowhere near the numbing power that music has. You know what the difference is like? It's like you going to the doctor saying, Doc, I have a question. I had a little headache. I took some Tylenol. Is the doctor going to freak out? He's not going to freak out. It's no problem. You took a Tylenol. But imagine if you went to the doctor and you said, hey, Doc, I had a little bit of a headache, so I had some morphine. He's going to be like, no. And you're going to say, oh, but they're almost the same thing. They both relieve pain. He says, no, morphine, that's on a different level. Just because a lower level of something is not harmful to you doesn't mean at the extreme level it's not going to be harmful to you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that is the power that music has. Someone might say, well, Sheikh, I feel like we're being a little extreme in our understanding. Let me give you some examples, brothers and sisters, so you start to understand how powerful this phenomenon is. People underestimate the power that the beauty of music has. The power, the impact that it has. Imagine you put together a gathering. Na'udhu billah, this is a bad example, but we'll take it. Imagine there's a gathering. People are committing all of the sins you can possibly think of under the sun. This one's gambling, this one's engaging with the opposite gender, this one's drinking, all of this. Imagine this, yes? Imagine if you kept this gathering the same way that it is, just like a typical party, yeah? Imagine you kept everything. Except you changed one thing. One thing. Imagine if you turned off the music. What happens to this gathering now? Now all of a sudden it's dry, it's boring. All of a sudden everything doesn't feel as great as it used to feel. All of a sudden the vibe isn't the same. All of a sudden, it's not giving that same energy. All of a sudden, people start leaving. Why? What did you do? You just cut down the music. You've seen sometimes when the police arrive at a door where there's an illegal party happening. What's the first thing they do? To shut down this party immediately. What's the first thing they do? They turn off the music. Because the life of that haram gathering is the music. This is the power of music. You're underestimating the power of music. Sheikh, I think these are very extreme. No, music is this powerful. Yes, because it's not tangible, it's a little difficult for us to understand. But this is how it is. How is it when you get in your car, you're going to go on a 5-hour drive to another city? This drive that's boring, it's dry, it's terrible, you don't feel like going. Yes, you already stopped at your first gas station, got your snacks, you're already regretting the whole trip. What changes? Think about this. What changes when you turn on that music? All of a sudden, that 5-hour drive feels like 2.5 hours. What happened? Is this anything other than the power of music? This is the impact that music has on the human being. Music has the power to make you feel like things have changed around you without really changing anything around you. Remember that. This is the power that music has. This person is sad, 50 different problems. Turns on the music, forgets about all of them. Did their problems actually get solved? None of them get solved. All of them are still there. But it makes him feel like everything is done with. Everything is fine. This is the power of music. Music has that type of power that it can take you and get you to take a gun and shoot a civilian in cold blood and not feel the guilt and assume it's just like some video game. When you watch some of these documentaries of what happened in Iraq, for example, soldiers talk about this. Part of the reason why it was so easy for us to just shoot down people was part of it was because of the music. This is the power that music has. You say, Sheikh, no, I'm never going to do that. I would never, go that far. Yes, I know. That's like the greatest of sins. But you don't have to go that far for music to impact your life negatively. That's not the only haram. There's hundreds of other harams. So what's the haram for you and I in our lives? You listen to this type of music. When the time for salat comes, you don't feel like it as much. You're relaxing. You're chilling. Everything's fine. When you want to set your alarm for Fajr, you're like, who cares about it? This is haram. This is a problem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a problem with this. It makes you more likely to move in that direction. This power of music is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declared it forbidden. Many times I've heard this comment. People will come and say, Sheikh, why does Islam not acknowledge that music is so powerful? It is a universal language. No, Islam, when it says it's forbidden, is acknowledging the power of that thing. Pay attention. When Islam says you're not allowed to engage in this act or this practice, does it mean Islam is dismissing that act and practice? Or is Islam saying this is a very powerful, impactful practice? It's the latter one. It's the second one. When Islam says the beauty of the female needs to be covered, only exposed in certain gatherings within the household, so on and so forth. Is Islam dismissing the beauty of the female? Or is Islam acknowledging the power and the beauty of the female? It's the latter one. And then you look at the society we're living in today, how femininity is used in everything. Objectified. Commercials, advertisements, whatever you want to use it for. You can, when Islam says, don't do this, that means it's so powerful and impactful that it has a negative impact on your life. Not that it doesn't have a power and a beauty to it. Of course it has power and beauty to it. Sheikh, music is a universal language. Yes, of course. You're the one underestimating the power of music, not Islam. Islam believes music is an extremely powerful tool. Hence, he forbids it. This is why you find in the lives of our beloved Imams, when it came to the issue of music, their stance was not indifferent. They never looked at music and said, yeah, it's not a big deal. No, they took a very firm stance. And you find this in the life of our beloved 9th Imam. Imam al-Jawad, when he's going through that wedding that Ma'mun al-Abbasi has forced him to go through, Ma'mun had a plan for Imam al-Jawad. His plan was this: I'll bring him into the castle, into the palace. When I get him into the palace, I'm going to get him used to the lahwi lifestyle. Yeah. the best of foods, the best of clothing, the best of this. Once I get him into this lifestyle, he's not going to stand there and object to what I do with Khilafah. He'll be on my side. This was his plan. So as part of this plan, the wedding was never a normal wedding for Imam al-Jawad. As part of the wedding, there was sin that Ma'mun was trying to infuse into this wedding. As part of this, what did he do? The moment the nikah was done, as a greeting for the nikah, as a celebration for the nikah, he brought 100 females, good looking, so that what? So that they each come and celebrate Imam al-Jawad on the nikah. This was part of his plan. Let me get him into this stuff. Because if he gets into this stuff, he's not going to object to me anymore. Let me have a luxurious, and historians have written about the luxurious wedding that he had put together. Because this was his plan. Let me pull him in. And as part of that plan, he went to this person by the name of Muharram and said, Muharram, I need you to come and play that type of music that's so soothing and it's so entertaining. He will forget about all this faith and iman and akhirah and all of this. He'll come on board. He'll be like one of us. He will like this lifestyle. Muharram told him, listen, I'm very good at what I do. I can pull that off for you. Let me do it. The day of the wedding came. After these women came and left, the luxury came and left, then Muharram came and sat in the presence of Imam al-Jawad. As Imam al-Jawad was there, Muharram took out his instrument and he started to play. And Imam al-Jawad kept looking at him like, you know you're not supposed to be doing this. Kept looking at him. Didn't stop. Went on. Didn't stop. It continued for so long that now Muharram sees Imam al-Jawad. He is clearly and visibly angry at what has happened. And at one point, he turned around to him. He said, Ittaqillah. And the narration says the hand of Muharram started to shake and he couldn't play anymore. Ma'mun looked at him. He said, what are you doing? He said, I can't play anymore. The narration says Ma'mun saw him later. He said, what happened to you? He said, since he said Ittaqillah to me, my hand doesn't work for the instrument anymore. Now, for you and I, it might be different. No one's telling you to go yell in some wedding. Yes, this is Imam al-Jawad. Different scenario. You're committing this sin in his own wedding in the presence of an imam. It's a different scenario, of course. But the point being that Imam al-Jawad's approach was not indifferent. His approach was that music can be a serious issue. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll move on to the verses that talk about music and a little bit more of answering some of the other questions that come up with regards to the Islamic ruling on the topic of music. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.